Thank you all very much for coming this evening. I'm going to be talking about the Great Northern Railway's architecture in County Louth specifically. And just to say a little bit more about me is that I have an online platform, no pun intended, Irish Railway Architecture. So if you'd like to follow my blog or my Instagram or Twitter, then please do. And feel free to use the hashtag and to tweet about this presentation as well if you like to. Okay, so for today's lecture, I'm just going to give a very quick introduction to the history of the Great Northern Railway. And then I'm going to move on and tell you about the first engineer-in-chief, William Hemingway Mills, who really was the man responsible for the architectural style of the Great Northern Railway. Despite the fact he was a railway engineer, he really was pioneering a very specific style of industrial architecture. I'll then show you the train line that as it stands in Louth, and then we'll start from Drogheda and we'll head northwards station by station, and we'll stop along the way and have a look at some of the examples of Great Northern Railway architecture. Okay. So the Great Northern Railway was formed in 1876. It was an amalgamation of earlier railway companies. These were the Ulster Railway, the Northern Railway of Ireland, which itself was a conglomerate of the Dublin and Drogheda Railway and the Dublin and Belfast Junction Railway, and also the Irish North Western Railway. The Great Northern Railway had over 600 miles of track and 142 railway stations. So this is a 1906 Viceregal Commissioner's map, and it really shows the vast extent of the railway network in Ireland and how much that's been lost. So for the Great Northern Railway, if you have a look where Dublin is and up towards Belfast, and then imagine the lines reaching out towards Donegal, Bundoran and Derry, and reaching all the way up in kind of like the shape of a hand. And more or less every single one of those lines was part of the Great Northern Railway network. And I quite like to give the present railway map, just really to demonstrate how much of the northern counties have been decimated by the closure of the railways. And really the creation of the border just made railway stations near the border targets, and they were strategic crossing points obviously as well. So they were too much of a liability and they were seen to be too expensive to run. Of course, now we know that if only they'd kept them running, we would have had a far more environmentally friendly transport system. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But my research is going around. I've managed to do half of my site visits. Unfortunately, COVID has prevented me from doing all of them, of travelling all around the northern counties, mapping, creating a digital map and a catalogue of every single piece of infrastructure that belonged to the Great Northern Railway. So it's not just railway stations, it's signal cabins, residential houses, station masters' houses, train sheds and running sheds and goods sheds and warehouses and workshops and things like that. So there's an awful lot of infrastructure. The vast majority of it is at risk. It's often not protected, they're not listed as protected structures. And as we'll see, some of them have either been completely demolished or unsympathetically renovated, shall we say. So William Hemingway Mills, the man himself, I always think he looks a bit like Captain Birdseye. A very handsome man himself. He looked quite trendy actually with his beard. He was actually born in Yorkshire in 1835, and he was the first engineer-in-chief for the Great Northern, where he joined them in 1876 when they were founded. And he remained in post until 1911, so he had 33 years really to make his mark on the company. And he's a very interesting career before he started at the Great Northern. This is Derby railway station. So like I said, he was born in Yorkshire. He did his apprenticeship with the chief engineer of the Midland Railway, William Henry Barlow. And Barlow is the man responsible for the massive train shed at St Pancras. So he really was learning from the best of the best in terms of early railway British engineers. And Derby Station was designed by Philip Hardwick. Unfortunately, it's actually now doesn't stand anymore. It's been demolished. But just to draw your attention to, on the left-hand side, the slightly projecting wing is up at the top where the pointed pediment is, and the round ocular window is quite a key architectural feature that Mills would use at the GNR, and we'll see it just in a moment as well at some of the other companies that he worked at. And then the first and second stories have their semi-architrave window heads. And then on the lower story, we have the rounded arches. And it's this merging of different architectural features that really became the key characteristics that Mills used at the GNR. So from 1869, Mills was the engineer in Spain for the Andalusian Railway. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. Apologies to anyone in Spain. And again, you can see here at the end, you have the ocular pediment. And really just to draw your attention to the two windows on the front elevation with the moulded semi-architrave window frames, as well as the central rounded entrance and the pitched roof above the central entrance doorway as well. So this is a very, very small, modest railway station. And it's not known if Mills was responsible for the architecture for the Andalusian Railway. He probably wasn't, but he was quite clearly open to influences of these styles of architecture. And this is Puebla railway station in Mexico. He was the engineer and general manager for the Mexican Railway for 4 years, from 1870 to 1874. So just before he moved back to Ireland and began working for the Great Northern Railway. And again, you can see we have the rounded arches and the ocular pediment. And as we'll see now, these were the key architectural characteristics that he took with him on his journey into the Great Northern Railway. So the railway stations that we're going to be looking at in County Louth are the mainline Great Northern lines, which goes up from Drogheda up towards Belfast and branches out towards RD. Now, there was the Dundalk and Gnr Railway, which was opened in 1873, and the Great Northern Railway did take control of this line in the 1930s. But because I'm focusing on Mills and his architecture, I'm not going to be looking at those railway stations today, but don't worry, they will be in my final thesis. So the stations that I'm going to be looking at this evening are Drogheda, Dunleer, Drummond Junction. Then we're going to head out on the branch line to RD. We'll come back and keep heading upwards to Castle Bellingham. Then we'll stop at Dundalk, and then we'll end the presentation with the final stop at Mount Pleasant, and then the line continues up and out past County Louth. And one thing really is a lot of people that are attending, like I said, have known me already from my master's. My master's was about the architecture at Dundalk, and not just the railway station, but the engineering works and the residential houses as well. And so it's really going to be a pleasure for me to come back to Dundalk because it's kind of my first love. It's where my railway journey started. And it's been a pleasure really to get to know people from Dundalk, and the Dundalk Railway Heritage Society have really helped me start my journey really. And then it's been absolutely fascinating to see how the styles that were at Dundalk really have been emulated across the network. So this is Drogheda's railway station. It was completed in 1852, excuse me, and it was designed by the architect George Papworth. for the Dublin and Drogheda Railway, obviously before it became the GNR. Papworth was also responsible for the railway stations at Kells and Balbriggan. And it's interesting as well that railway companies used to employ architects to design their railway stations, more because engineers were thought of as building the tracks and the locomotives and the kind of functional kind of operation behind, but the frontispieces and the public facing areas were needed to be beautified and presented to the travelling public as well, to promote the companies really and say, come and travel in style and look at our beautiful railway stations. What's interesting with the Great Northern Railway is they started to move away from this model, and this is widely reflected in the later 19th century across all railway companies, in that they realised that engineers were more than capable of designing architectural structures. In fact, one thing I found, I've researched for one of my chapters, the draftsmen of the Great Northern Railway, the men who actually created the architectural drawings for the architecture of the Great Northern Railway. And they all have very classical architectural training. They create beautiful technical drawings. And a lot of their reading lists included classical architecture. So they were by no means kind of purely practical and functional and only worried about pieces of iron. And this is the entrance at Drogheda. And you can see it's got a kind of a Romanesque villa style. Again, we've got these round hooded windows, and the central entrance porch has these lovely Roman Doric columns. I will say about Drogheda, and it's the same with Balbriggan as well, where I feel like Irish Rail have modernised them quite nicely. I do quite like the sliding glass doors. They don't always manage to do a good job, but they have here. So this is the central booking office. And again, the kind of neoclassicism continues. We can see the cornicing around the top of the ceiling. And again, the abundance of light that's being let in by these repetitive round-headed windows. And I love the they've kept the original lighting as well, which I think they were installed around about the 1910s. Maybe somebody would correct me on that. But one thing that is interesting that I have found is that the GNR were very forward-thinking. They were very modern. They were, I think, one of the first to have electric lighting in their railway stations in Ireland. I need to find a reference for that, but I remember reading that in a book and it sticks in my head. So again, just sticking with the cornicing as well, of these beautiful Greco kind of meanders that go around. So there was no need for a small station to be completely free from architectural flourishes, if you like. And this is, like I said, the architect George Papworth, but as we'll come to see, the engineer William Hemingway Mills was not far removed from these kind of architectural flourishes. So this is one of the first drawings that I'm going to show you for the Great Northern Railway. It's for the iron roof that was put onto platform 1. And I quite like this drawing because it includes the internal floor plan. So if we look to the bottom, you can see originally the booking hall used to have a central round booking office, which sadly no longer exists. We now have the ticket barriers instead. And I quite like, if we head off to the right-hand side, you can see you have the gentleman's waiting room, the telegraph office, the ladies' waiting room, as well as the urinals at the end. We won't spend too long talking about those. And then over on the left-hand side, we have the station master's office, the cloak room, and then quite nicely, we have quite a large refreshment room with the service counter just at the top, which leads through into the kitchen, which itself had a bedroom, which meant that the station was actually staffed all the time. The refreshment room maybe wasn't open all the time, but it meant that this particular area always had a member of staff, obviously staying in the station. And just to the left-hand side, you can just about make out there was a very small third-class refreshment room. And I think to call it a refreshment room is a little bit of a stretch. It's quite clearly just a service hatch, service counter. And railway stations are again a sort of a social history is coming in here, where they were the first public buildings to discriminate against class. So if you didn't have your first class ticket, you weren't coming in, or you were relegated to a worse service, if you like. So when we come up to the footbridge over the platforms, we look over, this is on platform 1. These are now 2 GNR buildings. So the building to the left-hand side is the archetypal polychromatic brickwork that mills used for the stations at RD and Drogheda, Dundalk, which we'll see. But the wooden building is actually a parcels office. And I'll just zoom in on these. So this is a beautiful building. I said I wouldn't spend too long on the urinals, but funnily enough, this is exactly what these are, which explains the frosted glass, and maybe internally as well. I think somebody's managed to put some curtains up as well. But just because it's a functional operative building doesn't mean it doesn't have to be beautiful. So the red, yellow and black brickwork is beautifully used here to accentuate the horizontal lines of the building, and with the stepped recessed brickwork around the window and door openings themselves are aligned and picked out in these black bullnose bricks which go across the segmental hoods, which themselves are raised up. And it really kind of accentuates, the features of the building and makes it, bold and stand out. It's a very bold statement for what is essentially a toilet block. The wooden building, like I said, was the parcels office. And just to cast your mind back to the Spanish railway station at Andalusia, where we have the moulded window frames, here picked out in wood, but the coins at the sides of the window frame would also be used for the station masters' houses, where the brickwork would actually be picked out in contrasting colours. And we'll have a look at that when we get to RD. And this is the original architectural drawing for the parcels office. So this really is a demonstration of a typical draftsman's drawing, which is signed by Mills up there on the top right-hand side. You can see in 1899. The level of detail and written specifications that are given all across the drawings is absolutely fascinating. He was adamant constantly that the best quality materials were to be used. Every single piece of wood was actually different, and they were sourced from Norway, the Baltic, as well as from Canada and America. So this is a tiny parcels office, but it was built from the very best materials, including the slate, which is on the roof, which comes from Wales. And one feature I do quite like, if you look down on the left-hand side in the left corner, for the internal plan, you can see that the countertops, the counters are actually inbuilt, as well as a kind of a central island as well. But off to the right-hand side, there's a bicycle stable, which still exists today. So it's quite nice that the original design is kind of still functioning as it was intended to do. So now we move across to platform 2 and platform 3, and this is a Gnr waiting shelter. These waiting shelters appeared all across the network, and designing in wood was no less important than designing in brick and stone for the Great Northern Railway. And again, not free of architectural flourishes at all. Again, you have the beautiful kind of cornicing and the moulded woodwork, up at the top, in the lintels up at the top, as well as the moulded brackets at the central entrance doorway. And thankfully, the original glass here is actually in place. Also to draw your attention to the iron roof, which I should have the drawing of here. Yes, so this is the original drawing for the roof. As you can see, you've got the platform up at the top. As you can tell, this is framed. This is actually at the Irish Railway Record Society archives. They have this framed up on the wall. Excuse me. This is dated 1887. You can see Mills's signature is down there at the bottom. One thing I have found quite interesting as well is that the brackets here all along the bottom are these kind of quatrefoil cutout moulded brackets. But when we look at the brackets, there they are, sorry, as a close-up, as they are, they're these kind of French curved designs, and sometimes this happens where there's a slight discrepancy from the original design drawing, and that tends to happen where a tender has maybe gone a bit wrong, where the contractor has been awarded the contract, but they themselves have then subcontracted it out to a different supplier, and it may have been cheaper, for example. But it's definitely not the original design that was intended to be built. It's beautiful nonetheless, but it's kind of off-brand. So like I mentioned, the GNR also designed residential properties. This is Railway Terrace, which is just to the south of the railway station. And now we're starting to get a sense that the polychromatic brickwork is not limited just to station buildings. We again can see here now the shape of the semi-architrave windows, which are picked out in the string coursing of bull-nosed bricks. And also then this is complemented by the upper story windows, which have their own yellow brick string coursing as well. Those pitched gable windows, if you remember those, what we saw again at the Spanish railway station, they're put to good use here in order to accentuate the front bedrooms. And these houses were built at Domain Terrace in Dundalk as well. They're built from exactly the same design, which I should have here, yes. So this is the drawing, it's dated 1901. And as you can see, they're built on a repeat pattern the entire way down the terrace. And what this design has meant is that it's malleable. You know, you can build, as we saw at Drogheda, 3 houses, 4 houses, and then at Domain Terrace, which we'll come to later when we get to Dundalk, there's 10 houses. So this kind of industrial design of industrial architecture, it doesn't mean that they're not beautiful, but they're functional from the get-go. The design of them, the form of them, and the function of them is really examples of beautiful industrial design. And again, this drawing is beautiful as well. Down to the left-hand corner, you can just about make out the draftsman signature of Hugh Milling, who actually himself trained as an architect. So, like I said, you know, the draftsmen and the engineers were far from kind of being unaware of architectural design qualities. And this is just a close-up here. So like I said, when I'm looking into the draftsmanship, just very quickly to draw your attention to the shading that's used underneath the eaves of the roof. And this is called descriptive geometry. It's to do with the casting of shading and shadows. And it's used in engineering drawing and architectural drawing, but more so in engineering drawing, to project, like I said, depth perception. So you know from this drawing that the central gables over the central window of the pitched roof had a depth to them, and that they were projecting outward from the wall. They weren't flush with it. And that's purely because of the shading that's used there. So now we look at the Boin Viaduct. Now, the Boin Viaduct is a PhD in itself, I have to be honest with you. It's one of these kind of megaliths, if you like. I myself have had to really summarize it, but it deserves kind of, like I said, someone really needs to take the Boin Viaduct on and research it, and research John McNeill as well, who was the engineer who designed it. So constructed between 1851 and 1855, and it initially had a lattice girder design, which was pioneered by this man on the right-hand side, like I said, Sir John McNeill. And this lattice girder principle was introduced to the British Isles by McNeill, and he was the first one to use it in cast and wrought iron. it was originally a patented American principle of engineering, but it was in wood. And McNeill experimented and was able to do experimentations with his students. He was the first professor of engineering at Trinity College, and he was implementing this design all across Ireland, all across Britain. Other engineers were then able to use this design. And again, it's completely malleable. It can be scaled up and it can be scaled down. And the Boin Viaduct is the largest example of the lattice girder design built by McNeill. But the first design was actually at the Royal Canal in Dublin. And I quite like these drawings. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, they're the next slide, sorry. These are the original drawings. These are signed by McNeill himself. So like I said, I have not got the time, unfortunately, in my own PhD to go through every single one of these drawings. But these are in the Irish Railway Record Society archives, and I've got a close-up here. Again, you can see the beautiful draftsmanship. So that's McNeill's hand. Creating those beautiful shadings. Even every single nut and bolt has its own shadow projection, just to communicate really the depth of the design. This was the what I thought was next. These lovely drawings of the Boin Viaduct and of Drogheda itself as well. So now we move to Dunleer. Dunleer is a very early red brick Gnr railway station. It was built in 1882, and the contractor was actually from Drogheda. It was Messrs Hammond and Co, and it cost £784, which is actually quite expensive. But it's one of the earliest surviving stations which has this polychromatic brickwork. So again, we can see here now we've got the segmental headed window and door hoods, as well as the coins, which I mentioned previously. You can see it just there down on the left-hand side of the full length of the building. And the Aston Hall Premier Buff brick is the name of the yellow brick, which is a bit of a mouthful, which is used to great effect, again, for the bullnose bricks. We saw it in the yellow brick building where they used black brickwork. And there's this interchangeability that Mills uses between yellow and red brick buildings. And the chimney stacks themselves are also decorative features, and they would appear on the station masters' houses and at railway stations, and they themselves sometimes have yellow brick string coursing as well to kind of really accentuate them. Again, we have the central pitched entrance with the mould barge boards, and we'll see from some of the later signal cabins that those kind of circular moulded barge boards would also appear. And then what's quite nice at Dunleer is the wooden dagger boards still survive, which is incredibly rare. So I think Dunleer needs a bit of TLC, needs to be looked after. Now we come to Drummond Junction, excuse me. This was not built by the Gnr. As you can see, it's actually a different design. I think this is the Dublin and Belfast Junction Railway. And unfortunately, the station no longer stands, but I do have a map. So again, this is from the Irish Railway Record Society archives. So you can see where the station was on the island platform, which it no longer stands. And if I'm correct, the line, I have this written down here now, the line at the bottom is, yeah, the Dublin to Belfast. So that's the one that still runs today. And then the branch line at the top is the one that heads out towards RD, and that's the one now that's closed. One thing I found interesting when I visited Drummond Junction is the only thing that remains standing are the houses. So if you look at the left-hand side of this drawing, you can see there's two semi-detached houses, as well as one block to the bottom left-hand side. And I was thinking, what on earth are these? So here we have on the left-hand side, well, actually, no, I'll talk about the cottages first. We have the two cottages which are semi-detached. Again, central pitched roof projecting over the entrance doorway, the semi-architrave window and door hoods, and again these moulded coins at the corners. So even though they're very different, arguably, to the yellow, red and black brick station buildings, they're still quintessentially GNR buildings. So the left-hand side is quite difficult to discern. I think I've got another angle of it. I couldn't tell at the time, and it's actually taken me a year and a half to figure it out. If you look at the chimney, and this is why I was pointing out the chimneys earlier, they're stacked red brick, which obviously isn't in keeping with the present state of the building. And you can see as well that there's a yellow brick string coursing just at the bottom of the stack. And the reason is because this actually used to be an original station master's house. There's one at RD, which we'll come to next. And as you'll see, it was a red brick main with yellow brick accents. And it's hiding in there underneath all of these extensions and things that have been added. But it's a fascinating kind of part of the history of Drummond Junction, really, where the station has gone, but the GNR stamp is still there. So this is RD railway station. Excuse me. So this was designed by Mills. And just like Dundalk, it really is now getting into his archetypal polychromatic brick branding for the company. It was opened in 1896, and Mills really was able to design RD completely himself because it was a new branch line. So he didn't inherit any old railway buildings from the earlier companies. So you can really see that he's been able to design the station, the running shed, which is at the back, the train shed, which goes at the back of the station, as well as the station master's house. But again, I have to keep saying it, semi-architrave window heads. We've got the recessed stepped brickwork for the windows and doors, the bullnose bricks, and also as well, I think I should have a close-up here. Oh no. I'll have to go back, sorry. Just to draw your attention then to where the McHale sign is. If you draw your eye to the right-hand side for the window frame, just on the window jamb, which is the side part of the window, you can see the beautiful moulded line of brickwork running down just the left-hand side there. And again, it's completely frivolous and unnecessary, but it's a beautiful architectural detail which adds depth to the building. Also, again, the central entrance with the pitched roof and the dagger boards that we saw at Dunleer. And again, if you notice, the shapes of the moulded chimney stacks as well are quite beautiful. And RD has a very, very rare, I think this may actually be, I think there used to be one at Lisbon, but now it's been demolished. And I don't know of any others. This is literally the only surviving example of a yellow brick platform train shed. So the platform is hidden behind that big doorway there, which now has been covered up with corrugated iron. And again, you've got the semi-architrave arches repeating down the line all the way along this shed building. And this is the original drawing for the running shed, which is at the back of the station. This is dated 1893. And unfortunately, that's as it stands today. But architecturally, you can see how brick branding really is utilised to great effect by Mills. And it's the round arches that we saw previously at the earlier railway stations of where he worked, and also the coins that are picked out on the corners of the building. And again, this drawing is another perfect example of the wonderful draftsmanship. And just interestingly as well, the draftsman for this drawing was actually Mills's son. Down in the left-hand side, you can just make out his signature, George Henry Mills. And he did his engineering training with his father at the Great Northern Railway. So as I said, the station master's house. So this is the red brick archetypal Gnr station master's house. This is the station that would stay. Sorry, this is the house that is contained within the former station master's house at Drummond Junction. So I mentioned previously the rounded barge boards. You can just see them here at the bottom rafters, as well as the finials, the downward finials as well into the corners. Some of them are missing. And we have the use of the combined round-headed windows as well as the semi-architrave windows. We've got the stepped recessed brickwork as well as the coins. And one piece that I do like as well, one feature, is the yellow string coursing just underneath the front elevation of the top floor window, just almost acting as like a belt, kind of tying the whole building together. So hopefully now you're really starting to get the sense of Mills developing a visual identity for the GNR, and this use of shape, form, and colour, as well as materials, to create this visual identity and brick branding. So now we rejoin the main line. This was Castle Bellingham Station. Unfortunately, this no longer stands. It's been demolished. But this was built by the Dublin and Belfast Junction Railway. It opened in 1850. Excuse me. The GNR didn't really seem to have much impact here. It was obviously a very large, fairly well-built station, which included the station master's accommodation on the top floor. The only intervention I can see here is the single story to the left-hand side is just that on the roof, there's a ventilator. And they're called Boyle's patent ventilators. And also the insertion you can see there of windows as well. This was quite clearly the urinal block, and I said I wouldn't speak too much about urinals, but here we are again. Mills was obsessed with toilets having ventilation and light. So the only kind of intervention I can see here at Castle Bellingham is the toilets. So having said that, I think we'll move swiftly on. So here we are at Dundalk, my favourite, my first love. Dundalk, the GNR station at Dundalk that was opened in 1894. Obviously, as many people know, Dundalk originally was a junction station. And it really is just absolutely beautiful. The sequence of buildings that run along the island platform are almost like a train carriage in themselves. And just the bottom picture will really give you a sense of the uniformity of the design and the malleability of the design. Like I said, they could be made into a urinal block. Here we are again talking about the toilets. Or it could be extended the entire length of the platform and it wouldn't lose its form or integrity. One feature I did quite like, and this is maybe where the engineer comes in, is the roof brackets on the top left. As you can probably just about make out, where the gutter is, there's a pipe that runs down underneath the bracket, enters into the roof support, the iron pier, goes underneath the platform and straight out onto the track bed. So it channels any kind of water away from the passenger completely, meaning that the platform doesn't get covered with puddles from the roof. So ingenious engineering. So this is the original drawing for Dundalk Station. This is signed in 1892. Again, we can see the internal plans. And the station master's office still exists. The telegraph office, we have the general waiting room for the first and second class, and the ladies' waiting room for the first and second class, as well as their own internal toilets. Here we are, toilets again, very important. The central building has the first and second class refreshment room with a service counter there. There's then a hatch which leads through to the kitchen, which has stairs down to the basement. And then on to the third class refreshment room. And again, here we see the class segregation, where the first and second class refreshment room has loads of windows, it has a lovely fireplace, loads of space for tables and chairs, nice big long service counter. You can imagine, you know, waiting for your train wouldn't have been too much of a hardship if you had that lovely room to wait in. And there we go to the third class refreshment room. Again, there's no room to sit down. It's a service counter. There's no provision of heat or light because there's just 2 entry doorways. So it's a case of get in and get out and go and wait out on the platform. And then we move down where we have the Parcels post office. And I think that's the general waiting room for the third classes, and again, toilets. So what was the first and second class refreshment room is actually now the museum. And here I am getting the guided tour. I think I can see some of the people in the picture are actually attending the meeting today. You really do get a sense of the abundance of light and space that was provided for the first and second class travellers. Unfortunately, now the service counter is gone, but it's a wonderful area. So this is a later drawing, but because of its colours, it really gives a sense of the polychromatic brickwork that was used. This is actually dated 1925, and this is for the provision of a new guards office. So obviously we have the creation of the border. Dundalk is now a border train station, which it never had to worry about before. And you can see here down in the bottom left-hand side where the dotted line is in the aerial plan, hopefully you can make that out on your screen, is where the original station building ended. And this extension now here that goes to the right-hand side contained a guard's office for the provision of customs as well as arrest. And this is the building as it stands today. And you can tell it's a guard's office because it has the iron bars on the windows. And that's an internal shot. And I mean, that just looks like a police station, doesn't it? Completely. And again, I was lucky enough to get a look inside. I wasn't in trouble. I wasn't there because I was bad. I was actually given a guided tour. And this is the original design now for the lattice girder footbridge. So as we saw with McNeill, who introduced the lattice girders, they were such an important design and a usable design that they were still being used kind of 40, 50, 60, 70 years later. This is dated 1892. And again, we have the enormous amount of detail given for the measurements, all the different elevations, as well as the different joints, joists, screws, sockets, every kind of angle you can possibly think of. I've shown this to a builder, to a carpenter, and to an architect, and they've all said if you were to hand that to somebody on a building site today, they'd be able to construct it. So that's how well designed and how well drawn these designs and these buildings were. And that's the footbridge as it is today, the internal walkway, and this is it from the outside. So again, we're very lucky at Dundalk that it's retained an awful lot of its original features and characteristics. Now, this is the design for the original roof at Dundalk Station. This is dated 1892. Again, Mill's signature is down there at the right-hand side. This is actually for the staircase, which no longer exists. I think it's now where the access lift is. But again, you can see the attention to architectural detail and these final finishes really for the cutout mouldings for the ironwork and the beautiful bracket. Give you a close-up there of the quatrefoil cutouts and the trefoil cutouts. They're completely decorative and they serve absolutely no purpose, but they're absolutely beautiful. And they, again, appear across all railway stations on the Great Northern Railway. Mills for whatever reason, took a shining to this type of design, whether it's maybe just out of a textbook or a trade catalogue, and he wanted it to be emulated across the network. So the visual identity isn't limited to the structural buildings themselves, it's also in these final finishing touches. And here we have them as they stand today. So again, Dundalk, like I said, has the original features in place. And it really is these finishing touches that bring the whole thing together. Nice features, again, that these appear across, again, all the network, but these are nice because they're local ironmongers. So you have Edward Manistee there on the left-hand side. These are the iron roof supports I pointed out earlier. And then you have the Gaskin brothers, and these were the iron roof supports at the front of the station building. Now, they're two different contractors, and the reason is, I think the ones at the front were added at a later date, and the Great Northern Railway has a reputation for always going with the cheapest contractors. And this is something that I found in the board minutes that I've been cataloguing the directors' board minutes, and they're constantly always just going for the cheapest tender every single time, regardless of say repeat business. They have absolutely no loyalty to any of the suppliers or the contractors whatsoever. So that's kind of here where you get the discrepancy, and you see that across the network as well. And on the left hand side you can see Stuart's granolithic. He patented, the company patented a very particular mix of cement, which included they called it diamond dust of granolithic, of granite, sorry, and he called it granolithic. And it's incredibly tough and hard wearing. And it's actually on the streets of Westminster as well. He was contracted by Westminster to actually pave the streets. So I do quite like that link between Dundalk Railway Station and the streets of Westminster. So you see the quality of materials that are really being used. This is the beautiful signal cabin that was rescued by Brendan McQuaid, who I think is here this evening. I think I saw his name. Which has been moved onto the platform, the Dundalk Central Signal Cabin. Again, it's beautifully preserved with the internal levers are all still in place. Architecturally speaking, it's a very boldly finished design, again with these round moulded barge boards, the pitched gable roofs. We've got the pointed principal right at the very top. And the moulded curved brackets, again with their little finials pointing down as well. And like I said, with the waiting shelter at Drogheda railway station, you can see here we have the rounded edged window frames. So again, like I said, branding wasn't limited to the solid structures. It was applied across all features of the railway infrastructure. And Dundalk, of course, had the central engineering works for the Great Northern Railway. This is a drawing from 1900, which is actually an addition to the original boiler shop. So as you can see in the top left, I think, do I have a close up? Yeah. The building that isn't coloured into the right-hand side is the building that existed. And the red and yellow washed building is the extension which was to be added. But again, just like we saw at RD running shed, you've got the accented round heads running the full length of the building and the ocular pediment windows. And this is as it stands today. Obviously on the right hand side, you can see it's been changed into a doorway. But it's absolutely, I mean, they're grand, enormous buildings. But again, the architectural features are quite delicate, with the stepped recesses of the brickwork on the the top story, as well as the bonded bricks that you have on the round arches, and also the ocular pediment window as well. And this is it from the other angle. It's absolutely stunning. It really is. I just quite like looking at them, really. You don't really need to keep talking. It's absolutely beautiful. Really, really grand. I almost think that it looks a little bit like the Parthenon. It's got that kind of classicism to it, as well as the grandiosity of scale. And this is an internal view. So even with the windows blocked up, there's an enormous amount of light flooding in. These were the original workshops, and I do have, that's the original photograph there. And you can really see the importance of light with all of this heavy machinery, and you can really imagine the noise and the heat as well. And just endless industry and manufacturing. The Great Northern Railway produced an awful lot of its own materials. You'll see that in some of the drawings where they'll stipulate that the nuts and bolts will actually be provided by the company, but the contractor has to fit them. So anything that could be made in-house was made in-house, right down to nuts and bolts, all the way up to locomotives and carriages. This is the front workshop offices, and the front elevation, which is on the top left-hand side, is actually facing into the works. So the elevation that we see from the outside, which is this photograph here, you have to imagine the front elevation on the drawing in reverse. So one feature that I quite liked discovering is, if we look at the photograph where the red car is, hopefully the owner isn't here today and they'll tell me off for having their car in the picture, where the round-headed window is, and it has the coins running either side, you can make out that actually used to be a door, because the coins run all the way to the ground level, and also just to the right-hand side of it, the coins stop halfway up. And the reason is because this used to be the side entrance tunnel for the staff. So now if we go back to the drawing on the bottom left-hand side, you can see that there is the entrance tunnel, and there are two service hatches, and you can just about make out, maybe it's too small, but there's pay window. Maybe you can see that. And it actually had a lower entry, internally the sill was lower, so that members of staff that were coming, the railway employees that were coming in and out of the workshops, had their own disc, like a metal disc. So they were known by their numbers, they weren't known by their names. And it's clocking in and clocking out, essentially. And this tunnel that was there was a very fast and efficient way of getting the workers into work and making sure who was clocking in and the time of arrival and departure. But obviously now it's been extended, and you could almost lose that feature in the current building, but this drawing really kind of brings that out and brings it back to life and reminds you of kind of the original function of the building. So these are the proposed offices, the general stores. Again, these stand directly opposite where the workshops were on the other side of the tracks. And it's a completely different design, even though they're still using the polychromatic brickwork. The round heads are actually picked out in bullnose bricks rather than just using the flat brick accents. But we've got the coins here on the corners as well. There used to be a shed running, a goods shed running completely to the back, but that was actually destroyed by a fire. But I do have the original drawing for it. So again, you can see Mills's signature here. Down at the bottom, it's dated 1906. And he's combined the use of the round-headed windows as well as the semi-architrave windows, the whole breadth of the building, as well as the ocular pediments at the end. And actually, I mentioned the Boyle's patent ventilators earlier. You can see them running all across the roof. So this is, I think, the last thing I'm looking at. I feel like I've been in Dundalk for ages now. You can tell I did this first for my master's. The residential houses. So we have Brook Street here on the top left, which has RD Terrace running parallel to it at the back. We have at the end then we have Brooklyn and Brookville, which are these two larger semi-detached houses on the bottom left. With their beautiful projecting moulded barge boards at the pitched gables, as well as the coins as well that we see there and the yellow brick string coursing running across underneath the first floor windows. And just like we saw at Drogheda at Domain Terrace, we have these this length of later GNR railway buildings with the pitched roof. So now our final destination. This is Mount Pleasant, or was Mount Pleasant. It opened in 1852. Again, this was a Dublin, Belfast and Junction railway station, and it closed in 1965. It's now been demolished because I have read that it was actually used for terrorist activity by the IRA, so it was actually demolished. But the features really of the signal cabin, like we saw at Dundalk, and these signal cabins were emulated again across the network from the 1880s onwards, is the moulded barge boards and the curved brackets. Underneath that, the hoarding there as well that's been put up, there would have actually been the round arched windows. So I will draw my presentation to a conclusion. So as you can see, even with just one county, I've just noticed you can see Boyle's ventilators there on the drawing behind. There you go. So just one county, we have a very small selection of railway stations out of 142 railway stations. And you can see already how we've demonstrated the key corporate branding that was created by Mills for the Great Northern Railway. So this visual corporate identity that's created across the network. It also evidences the expense and the quality and the care in design and construction that was put into every single structure that was built for the railway company, not just railway stations, like I said, residences, signal cabins, urinals, we'll talk about them again, but the quality of the design and the quality of the materials and the architectural finishes really demonstrate the quality of the company itself. And so the railway company, the railway network, all across Ireland, not just for the Great Northern Railway, but obviously just for this example this evening, we have a wealth of architectural heritage that's completely unprotected. Thankfully, there are some, groups and locals who will champion their former railway heritage buildings, but some of them, I mean, you can see at RD, for example, they're just not being looked after, and they're not being provided with the protection and perhaps the respect that they deserve. So my research, hopefully by the end of my PhD, I will get there, hopefully, eventually, is to really create a record in order to protect these structures. So I've created digital catalogues. I'm going to donate all of my research to the Irish Railway Record Society. That includes all of the digitised drawings, of which there are over 365, which I have taken just for the Great Northern Railway. These, I've created a catalogue for them as well, which will be searchable for future research students. And also I've created a digital map, so that every single location has been pinpointed and that people can then access those coordinates and either go and visit these former buildings themselves, or even just to mark their territory on the map so that people are aware of where they used to be. So I will leave it there. Thank you all very much. I hope people have managed to stay to the end. I hope I haven't been rambling on for too long. Again, just to say, if you would like to follow my journey, if you like, you can check out my blog, which is up there, and I'm always rambling on Twitter about something, so please do follow me at Irish Rail Arc as well. But I'll leave it there, so thank you very much.